Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with my pal, James Junkin.
Roll Tide, roll tide.
Well,
Basketball has been great, man. I love March Madness. I'm sad it's over.
well, I mean, there's always another season, right? Got another
Always.
team. Let's cheer for Alabama softball. And I'm his co-host, Dr. Martin, and we're here to talk about all things risk. Um, for those of you that follow us, we know we talk about current issues and things that are kind of hot topics. We're powered by Veriforce, but we do have people who sponsor us, and so we're going to take a second to have a little note from our sponsor, and then we're going to get right into it. Today, we're going to talk about ALARP.
Gathering data on your fleet has never been easier. Real-time tracking from Quartix improves your productivity, cuts fuel consumption, and minimizes vehicle wear and tear. Quartix improves driving styles and safety, reduces paperwork, produces timesheets, and validates hours worked, all backed by award-winning customer service. To give you the complete picture. Every driver, every vehicle, every journey. Quartix, more than just vehicle tracking.
Veriforce is proud to announce the latest version of our Safeland USA accredited course called Basic Orientation 7.0. This is our flagship course that has been taken by over 1.6 million students nationwide. The newest version of this course is shorter than the last version, with condensed training and updated multimedia, but it still includes the same topics as previous courses. As always, the Safeland orientation remains with this employee through the career. It eliminates the redundancy of multiple orientations, and it stores all the training records in a single centralized database for everyone to use. Also, we offer two solutions for getting the training. You can either seek out Safeland training from one of our third-party providers, or you can send one of your instructors through our Train the Trainer program to teach your own employees. If you're interested in learning more, please contact our training sales department at 888-482-9101. That's 888-482-9101. Or you can email us at trainingsales@veriforce.com.
Welcome back. In today's episode with James and I, we're going to talk about ALARP. James, you want to start us off? What's
I do.
ALARP?
I do. And before we get started in that, I want to talk about the new format the Risk Matrix is going to, where we're going live, baby. You know, these are all pre-recorded episodes, and you can find us on Spotify, Veriforce's YouTube channel, now Apple Podcast. We're there, and you can listen to Risk Matrix 24/7. But moving forward, there's an opportunity to be part of the filming process and have a live audience. So starting in April, around I think it's 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, we will go live. And if you check out our LinkedIn post there from Veriforce and also from Dr. Martin and myself, you will find the links where you too can be part of the broadcast and have opportunities to ask us questions, join in with comments, tell us we don't know what we're talking about. And so, you know, it's really great. I'm super excited. So look for those.
I can't wait to have somebody tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, because that's frequently maybe the case, I think. So yeah, let's roll with this new format after this episode. So thanks, James, for mentioning that. I was remiss in not mentioning that. So today we're going to talk about ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable. And this is a concept that actually is across the board in safety, but in some industries it's more of a hot topic than others. So James, you want to kind of fill people in on
Yeah.
where these.
You know, I'm going to give a shout out. Probably the class that I had in my academic career that had the most impact for me was Advanced Safety Management with a book by Fred Manuel, right? And it really changed a lot of my thinking, hazards being controlled in the design and planning stages of the work, and really implementing prevention through design concepts. But there was a chapter in there that Fred wrote about where he talked about as low as reasonably achievable And it was a concept that I knew from some of my radiation training, from studying to be an instructor
Right.
for NORM, right? We want to get radiation as low as reasonably achievable. And that means, without consideration of any type of resources or capabilities or cost associated with that. And it made sense to me when it came to, topics like radiation. But then we get in thinking about this new concept that he introduced to me, which is as low as reasonably practicable. And I thought,
They're different. They're different. Some people will say, oh, it's just kind of same thing, different kind of verbiage. No, achievable is how can you achieve this? How low can you go, right? How low can you go? It's like the limbo. But practicable has more to do with other inputs into the equation and not just can we go as low as we can go, right? We're talking about cost, we're talking about available controls, things of that nature.
human resources, capabilities of technology, all these things factor in. And the reason I'm glad we're talking about this, Dr. Martin, is when we apply this to risk in general, to hazards and planning in general, safety professionals often struggle with this idea of practical, right? They want to try to reduce risk to zero in everything that we do. And I do this exercise with my students that come to Veriforce as trainer. And I talk to them and I relate it sort of to the chemical industry. So let's say we had a plant, right? And the plant was emitting 2 parts per million of methyl ethyl megadeth, right? And that's allowed by EPA. We can emit 2 ppm methyl ethyl megadeth into the atmosphere. And we've been doing it, and we abide by the laws. But the management team comes to us and says, hey, we're right there at the cusp of what's legal. We want a safety barrier in here just so we don't have any mistakes. Because if we're just a little bit over, we're in trouble with the Environmental Protection Agency. So
that's right.
Go and do some studies, right? And so for $10 million, we could reduce that to 1 part per million. But for $100 million, we could get rid of it altogether. And I'd say, which would you choose if you were the decision maker?
Well, see, it comes down to business, right? I mean, it comes down to business, it comes down to the process, it comes down to availability of those resources to get there. I mean, I don't know how many businesses, I mean, I can name a few that would have $100 million lying around for that one hazard or that one issue in their plant. I mean, most businesses that operate have a plethora of issues, of hazards, right? And so you're looking at your risk register and you're balancing cost, you're balancing available controls, you're balancing, what's the risk of us going over versus do we have the resources to get there, right? So
9 times out of 10, the safety professionals all want to spend $100 million.
oh, absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely, right?
I understand your focus is on risk, but this is risk in the context of a business that does not have unlimited resources, right? We're not sitting over here with $100 million just camping out here behind the desk with the CEO. Let me just pull this out right here.
So James, don't get me started here. I mean, we're getting into that zone where safety professionals have a love affair with zero, right? We like nice, neat things. $100 million gets us to zero. That's great. If we can get rid of all of our risk, then that's great, right? We love zero, but zero is not practicable when it comes to a business.
I mean, we could cut the risk in half by going and investing $10 million. We get to 1 part per million. We're a full part per million. We're only talking about 2 parts per million. We're down to 1 part per million that we're emitting. We've done what the management teams ask us for. within what may be a reasonable amount of budget. But sometimes safety professionals don't understand the business side of safety, that there are not unlimited resources to reduce risk to zero. What's practical, right? In this case, I would say, and it's just an opinion, but I would say you become better received if you say, hey, we can do this at one part per million for $10 million. We've got a case that we can make for 100 million, but it's not making anybody safer, right? Because we're still safe at 2 ppm. We still have some risk, but it's risk that I think the business organization probably can live with because it's within the legal framework. So that may be a silly exercise, but it really goes to the mentality of safety professionals, and particularly those that I train. And this is a wide variety of safety professionals, some with 1 year experience, some with 50 years of experience, some with degrees, some with no degrees, some with certification, and the answer is almost always the same. 9 times out of 10, they look for how do we get to zero? And zero is not practical.
So let's just jump back a little bit. I mean, when you talk about, presenting these options, everything, I mean, we talk about the value of safety and how to show why you should spend money and et cetera, the return on investment. But there's a cost benefit analysis that goes into this too, right? I mean, even if we're at the limit, 1 ppm is the limit, right? Getting there for 10 million or 100 million to go under that is going to cost X amount of dollars, when, perhaps you take the risk of getting a citation and you keep people, it's a balance of what your business has for funding, for resources, for monitoring, all those different things. So cost benefit comes into play here, just like your return on investment.
Well, I agree with you. And what you said something earlier, I agree with, which you got to look at these in the context of the overall risk register, right? So just because the management team comes and says we're at 2 ppm, we need to get, some buffer between us and potentially an illegal emission, maybe within the context of your risk register and the hazards within your facility, that's not the top priority. That's not the super risk that's out there that needs to be mitigating. So, when you're looking at ALARP, I'm never good at pronouncing it, right?
ALARP or ALARA, right? That's what we were talking about originally.
ALARP, right? Roll Tide. When you're looking at that, it's got to be looked at in the context of a risk assessment of your entire hazards and risks that are associated with facilities. So you get resource allocation appropriately. So it sort of begins with that. And then we're talking about what's the cost benefit analysis of this, right? What are we going to gain from it? We're trying to get to something that is practicable, right? Mm-hmm. OSHA doesn't say we have to eliminate all hazards, right? Reasonable and predictable hazards.
Right.
It's the term used inside the standard. So if you're getting started with this concept and saying, hey, man, I'm losing my mind out here. I've got all these hazards, all these risks. I'm trying to get it to zero. Well, that's why you're losing your mind. You're never going to get it to zero. But what controls can we put in place to make it practical? Start with a risk assessment and then do a cost benefit analysis that says, this is what we want to spend, because you do not have unlimited resources.
Well, right. And you need to put it in the context of the organization as opposed to just the context of that one issue, right? Zero is a myth, right? I think we've talked about zero before on maybe 1 or 2 of our episodes. As soon as you can wrap your mind around that as a safety professional, that zero is a myth. Okay. And I'm just sure I'm going to get lots of flack for this, right? It becomes easier to see things in a bigger context, in the context of the organization, in the context of, again, what's the biggest hazard? What's the most likely hazard? What's the most severe thing that can happen? We're dealing with all of those things, and to get all of them to zero, in my estimation, in my opinion, as Dr. Martin, it's not feasible, right? Feasible, practicable, etc. But you can do your level best to get everything within range of having a safe organization.
I think another component of this that can be improved upon by safety professionals that fits into this concept is a better understanding of what we've titled this show, a risk matrix, right? The risk matrix.
That's right.
A risk matrix is very subjective. It's very subjective. Two people may come to different understandings when we talk about severity and probability, particularly on the probability side of things, right?
Well, this is why we have HAZOPs, right? This is why we put a team together and we look at it holistically as a team so that those differences in opinion can be brought to one mind.
And while these tools we're talking about are commonly found in chemical processing, refineries, offshore oil and gas, big time early in my career, this was a lot of what we did was offshore oil and gas. You can apply these same concepts to construction, manufacturing, even in the engineering of design phases of where your engineers get involved in designing the processes that you have within your organization or within your plant. So ultimately, everything really comes back to risk matrix, hierarchy of controls, right? Hierarchy of controls.
Well, let's talk a little bit because you mentioned refineries and chemical processing, right? When I talk about zero and I talk about risk matrices and looking at things holistically, like having several things on your risk register that you need to get to practicable, right? There are many things that we do in life, in industry, etc., where risk cannot be removed. We still need the goods and services. Some things that we make are just hazardous by their very nature, and there's risk there, right? And so that's where you can start to wrap your head around the fact that you can't remove the risk, but you can get it as low as possible within the parameters of your business, right? Because some things just can't be zero.
That's right. And so as a safety professional, understand, particularly in the US, and we're starting to gain some international listeners, and I really like how the rest of the world is very risk-based and the US is very regulatory-based, right? So we've got this big old book to go by. Often we have to have 50 letters of interpretation to tell us what that book actually means. Sometimes those letters are in conflict with each other, right? So you got to figure all that out. But OSHA doesn't anticipate every scenario. There's no way to get to zero risk in most high hazard activities, right? So then it's reasonable and predictable. And did you get it to as low as reasonably practical? Firefighting, for example. Now I know OSHA doesn't get involved in that per se, but firefighting has inherent risks associated to it. Operating an aircraft.
If it was without risk, we'd have no fire.
We'd have no fire. We definitely wouldn't have. If we tried to reduce risk to zero, we'd have no firefighters. We probably wouldn't have California. It'd been gone a long time ago. That place is always on fire, and other sections of the state of the United States. So, in my estimation, when you're talking about practical, we've already said that this is a hazard that we cannot eliminate. So if we go back to the hierarchy of controls, right, the first one is elimination. So for whatever reason, we cannot eliminate this hazard, and working and exposing workers to this hazard is part of what we do, right? Mm-hmm. So then we're talking about the barriers that we put in place, whether in most cases,
talk about substitution
in there, right? Maybe we can't substitute.
Got to be done.
Then we're down to administrative controls or engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. And I think that's where you get in mainly when you're talking about reducing risk to something that's practical or practicable, right, is now we're talking about engineering and administrative controls, right, and primarily engineering controls. And that's going to cost money in some cases. So that's
And
how it
sometimes
all
the
works together.
technology doesn't exist, James,
It might not.
right? I mean, that $100 million that you're talking about to get, some air monitoring or whatnot, chemical to go lower, that might just be R&D, right? Because it may not exist yet, right? And if you look at some of the standards, for example, in OSHA, right? If you look at the table, the Z table, right? And you look at the chemicals and the chemical levels, a lot of them are very old or outdated, or we don't know. And the reason for that is because not even OSHA or any of the research agencies are doing research on it because it's just too expensive, right?
Right.
The risk is there. You got to deal with it. What is practical?
Well, I want to throw this in here. This kind of maybe chasing a rabbit down a hole, so to speak. But here's my take on OSHA and what a lot of people think OSHA is and what OSHA is not. OSHA is not the great safety professionals in Washington, D.C. sitting down together and deciding what it is that's the safest methods and the safest exposure limits for workers, right? OSHA represents a compromise.
Practical.
Right? OSHA regulations are made by lawyers, lobbyists, and the government. And as divided as America is politically, I think we can all agree there's nothing more troublesome in the United States than lawyers, lobbyists, and the government, right? No matter what side of the aisle you find yourself on. So it's what they could get passed in compromise through Congress, being influenced by lobbyists, being influenced by lawyers and different court cases and things of that nature. And that's why you see a disparity, right, between the standards. So I like to throw this one out here. Fall protection, 4 feet in general industry, 6 feet in construction, right? Okay.
And you know what? You can fall an inch and you can be paralyzed or you can die. Okay.
Yeah.
So
but what's the number one killer in construction?
false.
Falls. But yet they have the more restrictive or less restrictive of the height requirements, right?
And then if you look at scaffolding or steel erection, it's even less, right? So again, we get into lawyers, lobbyists, and the government. But
so I guess my point is in all that is when you're looking to OSHA regulations, that needs to be what the minimum is. It may be not what's most practical. Given the
I wish more people could put that in perspective, James, right? I mean, if more people looked at it from this perspective of this is not a bunch of scientists sitting down. I mean, believe me, I can go through the regulations and I can give you some scientific reasons why they should be more stringent, right? And so should every safety professional, I think, right?
Science, but I can tell you, James don't want to be within 10 feet of an energized power line that's 50,000 volts. That's just James. I'm not a scientist.
Well, right. So I wish more people would approach it from, these are the bare minimum, and we're looking at kind of the outward boundaries of kind of like if you have a child and you want to keep them in the yard, you have a fence around the outside of the yard. But if you want to keep them safe, then that's a different story, right? Because there are things within the yard that could hurt them.
Here's one that just popped top of mind: excavation. How anyone gets killed in excavation activities, I don't know, but it happens all the time, and the standards are pretty clear. So whatever the standards are, they're not working because people aren't using the standards, and usually it comes down to what I consider shielding, sloping, benching type situations where we're not protecting.
Staying the heck out of the hole.
Absolutely. So how can we reduce this risk to where it's practicable, right? In order to maybe not even have workers go into excavations or hey, we're working at heights. Can we do something else? So really, when we're talking about practical, the hierarchy of controls is key to this, right? It's very much key to this. Now, when we get over into the chemical industry, what we're talking about is reducing the potential for chemical spills, releases, and explosions.
And exposure.
And exposure. I forgot. That you're the industrial hygienist.
Yeah, I was going to say that's my industrial hygienist in me, right?
That's right. So how do you go about applying it in the chemical industry? Still, it's back to the same principles of risk assessment. What's our risk, right? What's our risk matrix say about severity and probability? How do we apply the controls? We know we got this risk. Well, what's the cost benefit analysis for doing things to further reduce that risk, knowing that we're never, ever, ever going to get to zero? What about this industry, Dr. Martin? Healthcare. They have risk all the time. And we don't really ever talk about healthcare in this show, but my sister-in-law is a doctor. And she worked during the COVID time. She's worked in infectious disease. She's worked in trauma, ICUs over the years. And she's told me all these horror stories of potential situations where the caretakers could become ill based on the exposures they have from the patients, right? So, what do we do with sterilization? I just got out of the hospital not too long ago, and I came home with an infection from the hospital. I went to the hospital for an infection and came home with the hospital with a different infection. Roll Tide. That could only happen to me. Only happened to me.
Yep. So, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I think perspective is everything. I touched a little bit on HAZOPs and the benefit of HAZOPs when it comes to being reasonable and practicable, right? When you get together a team, we're going to disagree, right? The safety professional, I mean, more often than not, we're looking for zero. The engineer is looking for technical. The business manager, the owner is looking for cost, and everybody's got a different driver.
There's another person with a seat at the table in this reasonableness, legal counsel.
Legal counsel,
because
right?
Reasonable is a legal term. Okay.
And when you sit down at the table, right, egos aside, everybody needs to look with the eyes of the other people in order to come to an agreement. What's reasonable still meets with the regulatory requirements and can allow work to go forward, because again, business and industry are in the business of business, right? We're here to make products and provide services, and short of not providing them, I don't think we can get to nothing when it comes to risk.
Get to nothing, but let me throw this in here for everybody's consideration. When you have a regulation, the regulation is the regulation. It is what it is. It doesn't matter whether you think it's reasonable or not. It is what it is. It's in these areas of gray, right? Or where it's not fully addressed. Or even though you may be in compliance, a jury might say you're not acting reasonable because the hazard, right, is one that everyone recognizes and it was predictable.
Right.
So when you think about OSHA regulations not being updated routinely, I mean, how many updates have we really had since it came out in 1970? Not that many, really not that many. And it takes a new standard a long time to get in place, just like the heat illness prevention standard that's sitting right there at the cusp at OSHA right now that may be going away. We probably ought to do an episode on all that. So regulatory stuff aside for a moment. Reasonable. What does reasonable mean? Well, reasonableness is what all of our laws are based on. All right. It comes from the British common law concept of what would most people choose if given the same set of facts.
That's why we have a jury made up of our peers.
That's right. And let's say this about the peers. And I like to say this in my trainings to students. A jury is not going to be made up of a bunch of petroleum engineers, chemists, industrial hygienists, and safety professionals. A jury of your peers. You want to pick a jury of your peers? The next time you're at Walmart, pick the first 12 people to walk out. That is a jury of your peers. So when you're thinking about what's reasonable, all the people and entities that you talk about need to be at the table, including legal counsel, because, excuse me, there may be case law on your current situation that says and defines what some other court has held reasonable in your situation to be. So as you're adopting these what's practical, there's what's practical in your mind, there's what's practical in everybody else's mind. So it's really a group effort, and that's why I'm glad you mentioned HAZOPs, because that's a perfect place to get everybody together to talk about these things.
And have a collegial discussion, okay? I have often seen other safety professionals come into HAZOP as a consultant, being a consultant in those meetings, and have them come in and be completely turn a blind eye to the concerns of others. Now, legal, you can't get around. Regulatory, you can't get around. But when business owners, the financial people, the engineers, the other scientists, when they have concerns or they have concerns about being too tight with the safety regulations, or not the regulations, or the safety ideas, let's put it that way, that they do not listen to the other's point of view, right? So cultivate a strong humility when you come into these HAZOPs. Cultivate a strong humility around what's practicable and what is reasonable and what is good for the business and also good for the employee and the environment and property, etc.
One of the worst cases I've seen of this not taking place happened a few years ago, where the hiring client is an oil and gas company, implemented FR requirements for everyone on all their properties. It's just a blanket. Everybody's going to wear FR. Okay. That also included people like surveyors. Now, why in the world would a survey crew need FR on? There's nothing out there to protect them from for as far as flash fires and arc flashes, things of that concern. They don't need arc-rated material. In fact, we're making it worse for them because now we're instituting more heat stress. All that's out there with those cats is a sage field. They're more likely to get bit
more training, more
than they are burn up in a fire, right?
Right.
But some of them took the lazy way out and said, we're just going to make this a requirement from everybody, without considering that might not be practical for every organization or contractor that's involved in
nor needed
this project.
Nor needed, right? So, well,
right.
do you think we took this to its logical conclusion there, James?
I think so. And the thing I think will help with in the future, we've talked about this, the potentials of AI in helping us determine what's practical. Technology, you mentioned it. The technology may not even exist yet for the hazard that you're trying to reduce to something that's practical. Just like my mother used to say, sometimes good country common sense is all you need.
Amen. Amen. Your mom's a wise woman.
That's it.
So thanks for the spirited discussion, James. And I just want to remind you, I know you did at the beginning of the show, that we're going to be going live after this, and we're going to have people, hopefully some of you all, chiming in on our discussions, being present while we're talking and asking questions, telling us when we're right, we're wrong, or otherwise, maybe adding something that we didn't think about. So look forward to that, James. And if people listen to our show, well, how can they get a hold of us?
Well, while we're going live in the filming process, it'll also be replayed there on YouTube at its normal times, Spotify, Apple Podcast. It'll be there on Veriforce's YouTube, like I mentioned. We also repost this on LinkedIn. Hey, any platform that you get your podcast, we're pretty much on. So you can reach out to us through the podcast. You can reach out to us through our LinkedIn accounts or our personal email accounts. We want to hear from you. We put a call out the other day for guests to come on our show. If that's you and you've got something you want to say, we'd love to talk to you. Get in touch with us in front of the myriad of means that there are out there to communicate with me and Dr. Martin. And most of all, thank you for being a listener. You know, we're on Reddit. Did you know that, Dr. Martin? Someone commented about what is one of the top safety shows out there. And they said, check out the Risk Matrix with Dr. Martin. And it was outstanding comments about you and the influences you've had on some of their lives. And you know, I've gotten some messages from people that listen to us. And I think that's important because we're doing this for you. We're doing this for you.
And we want to talk about the things you want to hear about. So give us some ideas and certainly participate with us as we go forward with our live show. So like, subscribe, go back and listen to our past episodes. And thanks again for being a listener.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for what you do to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. Until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe and roll tide.
Roll Tide.